Hi. Today we have a special topic. We are going out a little bit, I would say, to talk about big things of the world. Sometimes we get into the nitty-gritty of the practical of our lives, but today we're going to be looking at science and faith as a topic, how the two intersect, how they play out together in the world, how they both inform us of God's creation, and really how we can have conversations and how we can use both science and faith to understand who God is, who we are, our place in the world. And we are bringing you a wonderful expert, Dr. William West, who is a medical doctor. He was trained at both Harvard and Johns Hopkins medical schools, and he is the author of a new book, and it is Sacred Science, Understanding Divine Creation. And he is going to guide us through, based on his career as a medical doctor, based on his own research and understanding of science. And he's going to guide us through this conversation around how we understand the world with these two paradigms that don't have to conflict, but sometimes the world tells us that they do. I do want to tell you that Dr. West founded the West Clinic in 1979, and he grew it from a single practice into a network of 5 locations with 25 physicians and 273 support staff. They treat 300 to 400 patients weekly, and he works in the world of oncology, so we're going to touch a little bit on that. And his interest in oncology stemmed from his own mother's passing from breast cancer when he was in medical school. So her own journey of disease and science in what I'm assuming was midlife for her impacted her young adult son as he was beginning his medical career, and we're going to hear a little bit about that. So please join me in welcoming Dr. West. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you. As I said in the introduction, we often talk about really practical things about how we live out our days. And I do think that this has some practical application. But let's start very big picture, the relationship between science and faith. What has the historic tension been between these two? And you talk a little bit about there hasn't always been tension. Sometimes there's been times of collaboration. Just give us an overview of how people have historically looked at these two paradigms of understanding the world.
Well, the great scientists of the 16 and 1700s, Newton being a great example, pursued their investigations to understand the thoughts of God. They never doubted the existence of God, and their mission was to read God's thoughts.
Hmm.
Newton is a great example. He was the first scientist to actually write his thesis in mathematics. But of course, mathematics has been an important part of this journey of science, and so God is the ultimate mathematician.
My husband's a physician as well. And I remember him so vividly when he was in medical school. And he just kept saying, I don't know how people don't see God's hand. But he was in the cadaver lab learning about the human body and how everything works. And as he went along on his medical training, he just said, it is a miracle that everything works the way it does. How can we not believe in divine design when you look at the evidence just in who we are, just in our biology? So, what was that journey like for you as you kind of went through medical school and your medical training?
Well, my mother died right in the middle of that process, and so I was really hungry to understand how cancer happens and what our body does to try to prevent cancer. But there's some amazing facts that I wish people would think about a little more often. We replicate our DNA 1 trillion times a day.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
1 trillion times a day, we rebuild our genome, which is over 3 billion letters. DNA is just 4 letters, A, C, T, and G. And 3 of those letters constitute a component of the gene. And we have to rebuild our DNA 1 trillion times a day. So it's, to me, just astounding. And we live in an era of DNA, and yet we have absolutely no idea where DNA came from. It just appears. And I'm really proud, actually. I think it was the Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, saying there's no way today we could build an information storage device to match DNA. And that's simply the truth. And yet we all sort of live in an era of DNA and take it for granted. One fun story about that, Watson and Crick won the Nobel Prize for the double helix. And before Crick died, close to his death, he said, there's no way DNA was formed on Earth. It had to be flown into Earth from outer space. So that gives you some idea of the profound nature of DNA, what a miracle it is. We all take it for granted, and yet from whence did it come? It's just amazing that it's been able to build 5 million species in this journey of life.
Wow. It's mind-boggling to think about it. And it's faith building to me to think about it. So I would love to hear a little more of your journey of when your mom passed away. Did that light a fire in you to kind of go down this road?
No, it did. It was the early days of immunology and trying to understand how our bodies react to cancer. We all have this very special cell. I was in the room when we named it the natural killer cell. We all
Mm.
have these NK cells
Oh,
that circulate in our bloodstream and look for early abnormal cells and kill them. And that raises the question of why some people don't defeat cancer in its earliest stages. And that's been a journey actually for worldwide for thousands of scientists trying to understand why our immune systems fail. One reason, a cancer cell learns how to give our immune system a secret handshake and to
mm,
say, I'm okay, I'm supposed to be here. Particularly the T cell, you may be familiar with, we have T cells, the killer cell in our body, the smart cells. And the cancer gives that T cell a sacred handshake and says, I'm supposed to be here, don't worry about me. And what's happened in the recent 10 years of oncology, our field of treating cancer, is the development of drugs to break that handshake.
mm,
So we can actually deliver drugs that go in and unhook that handshake and allow our T cell to see the cancer cell. And that's been, a dream actually ever since I was a 20-year-old thinking about tumor immunology. We actually now have that, and it's made a big difference in some cancers. We hope many more. I hope that's just a beginning.
That is
wow.
such a helpful way to think about it. You just have to really dumb it down for me. And so that was Dr. West, actually the secret handshake that puts it in a language that I can really understand. And that's fascinating. And how incredible for you to be a part of this movement, this
Hmm.
solution. You're blazing a path, so to speak. What has that been like for you?
Well, it's humbling. I realize that there are thousands of me around the world pursuing the same goal. And just a small story, the wonderful scientist who realized we have this handshake and the ability to unblock the handshake, it took him 3 years to have anybody listen to that.
Mm,
And actually now it's become a huge industry. You see it advertised on TV every night,
mm,
uh, particularly a drug called Keytruda. You'll see it being advertised. And I have to almost laugh at the time it took to recognize the value and the importance of that, such that now we see it on our TVs every night.
mm,
And
mm.
that that's been an interesting observation to make. The time it takes for something to go from hypothesis to an ad on television.
Yeah. And that brings me to a question I think that our listeners may have, but maybe have never articulated. I don't know that I've ever articulated this until I was thinking about this interview. And that is the speed of which we are given new information based on research and science. And sometimes when it's new to us, we feel like, is this true? How do I know that it's true? What? So, for a person of faith who looks at scripture as kind of our guide of what is eternally true, regardless of circumstances, and then a new scientific discovery comes up that might blow our mind a little bit because it is a new way of understanding how the world works. How do you guide people through that process of believing science?
Well, the important thing about a scientific hypothesis is it has to put itself up to be defeated.
Mhm.
It has to stand the test of time. And all our great discoveries are still under question. We could question things that perhaps Newton projected in the 1600s. So there's nothing that's final. I mean, everything has to be re-examined in the light of different findings, and that makes it actually a very exciting field because you never are settled, and it's fun to try to build on hypotheses, see them stand the test of time, and think, okay, that's probably right, but realizing it's never ever finally done.
Mhm. It's never done because it's so complex. And that's where I'd love to just for us to enter, for faith to enter the conversation. And how have you brought faith into that world and into those complexities?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you my favorite story, and it has to do with how the universe became physical. We all take it for granted. You know, we all have weight and we have hard things, and I'm sitting here at a desk. But the universe didn't have to be physical. We could have had just a light show. In the beginning, God said, "Let there be light," and I reread that. I just reread it 30 minutes ago. It just astounds me that someone 700 years before Christ could make that statement, that profound statement. There was a beginning, and it was involved light, and that's exactly what happened. But then, how did our universe become physical? And I go back to a wonderful scientist, Peter Higgs, Higgs. And I don't know whether you've ever heard of the Higgs field or not.
No.
Well, Peter Higgs looked at an equation and he said, you know, if the universe were filled with this type of particle, we now call it the Higgs boson. Boson is a type of particle in physics. If the universe were filled with these Higgs bosons, they would bump into the components of atoms that make us, and they would give those components mass. To be physical, we have to have mass. We all worry about it in the form of our weight. That's the
Hmm.
gravity force of Earth acting on our mass. And Peter Higgs discovered this equation. And then that raises the issue, where does that equation spend eternity? That goes way back to Plato and to some of the very early Christian philosophers, that there is a higher dimension where God has stored a library. There's a library of mathematics. The great mathematicians believe they have the ability to visit this mathematical landscape. Roger Penrose is a great example. He just won the Nobel Prize. He's now Sir Roger Penrose for his work on the black hole and understanding how information is managed in the black hole. Very important topic in science. And he actually believes that he has the mental ability to visit a mathematical landscape in a higher dimension and see these equations. So have most of the great mathematicians in history. And I just found that astounding and wonderful. And so I used Peter Higgs as an example. He looked at this equation and asked that question, where does this equation
Hmm.
spend eternity? Which then takes us to the libraries in a higher dimension, which I'm a huge believer of. And if you want to talk about evolution, let's go to evolution and realize there are libraries like math of genes and proteins that are downloaded into the genome of a potential new species. And over deep time, that team of genes gathers until it's time to have a bat. And we don't have a partial bat. We don't have a bat that can almost echolocate. We have a wondrous bat that echolocates and flies right over our head without running into us. So it's the concept of libraries in a higher dimension, to me, is completely religious. Those libraries were established by none other than God Himself. And that's how I see Him supervising the journey of life, supervising the rollout of this amazing universe.
Well, it explains a lot to me who hears a story about someone like Higgs
That's his
and
name.
looking at an equation, and I think, how does somebody know that when it's so far beyond my area of comprehension? So
Well, you know,
maybe this library is the key.
these particle physicists are pretty smart people. He hypothesized that in 1984, and then in 2012, I think it was, they actually created the Higgs boson by you ever heard of CERN? It's a particle collider, and I think it's in Switzerland. and they were able to collide particles at sufficient energy and force to spit out a Higgs boson and prove that they exist and that they are real. So there you go, from an equation to a scientific journey to prove that the Higgs boson is real. That then, to me, raises the possibility that we are absolutely the product of God's libraries in a higher dimension. I'll move on and say, in the first section of my book, after thinking about it a considerable period of time, I realized that there are 8, and I call them blueprints, that established the universe. There was a Big Bang. There's a lot of evidence for the Big Bang. It's now been pretty well scientifically proven. And that delivered a package. And in that package were these 8 blueprints. And I call them blueprints because they're mathematical. And to describe space-time requires 10 mathematical equations well beyond my mathematical expertise. But so we have these 8 blueprints, and then when you look at them, you realize they're each a work of art. They are super intelligence, each one of them. And without one of the 8, we're not here. So it required all 8 of these exquisite blueprints. And again, I like to think of them now actually as works of art, reflecting the mind of God and how He created this universe and put this package together in this moment of creation. And again, I just actually reread the first sentence of the Bible. In the beginning, there was nothing, and God said, "Let there be light." And in that light, we get delivered these blueprints that made the universe what it is. And I just found that astounding. We'd simply say that science and Scripture are so mutually reinforcing. They are both revelations. And if I had to say anything about sacred science, my book, science is a revelation of God. And if you understand it, and it hurts me a little bit that we don't get to teach it very well. We really don't. And it almost makes me sad that if you ask the average high school student if they understand the Higgs field or have ever heard of the Higgs boson, they'll say no. Even more complex is the quark, Q-U-A-R-K. I don't even try to get into that one because it's kind of a weird little term, but they're up and down quarks and they form the nucleus of the atom. Actually, I will explain that.
Go for it, Dr. West.
There are 2 flavors of quarks.
We can handle it.
You tell me what you think of this. There are 2 flavors of quarks. There's an up quark and a down quark, and they carry fractional electric charge. The up quark is 2/3 positive, and the down quark is 1/3 negative. Now, this is comparing the charge to the electron, which is -1. So we have a 2/3 up and a 1/3 down. So, and they always are in groups of 3. So if we have 2 ups, we have 2/3 and 2/3, 4/3. With 1/3 down, we have 3/3. That's a proton. That's a positive. And that matches the negativity of the electron. And then if we have 1 up and 2 down, we have 2/3 positive, 2/3 negative, 1/3, 1/3. We have the neutron. So I look at that and I think, could you not believe God designed that? You think that just popped out of the sky as an accident?
Truly. It's just mind-boggling. It's mind-blowing. And yet, Alex and I went to college together. We went to the same secular college. And I had professors that knew I was a person of faith, and their mission was to talk me out of that faith by the end of the semester. And you're in that world. And so what do you say to that? I mean, you're in the world of scientists that want hard data, they want hard facts, and they don't think that there's a divine design behind that.
I think we're moving backwards in the right direction. I haven't sensed that. And of course, I'm in a world treating cancer, and goodness knows we think that a person's spiritual beliefs are important in the management and care of their cancer. I think we're moving in the right direction. I think people are realizing that there's a big explanation, and now we have. Let's take one example: the Big Bang, the origin of the universe in a single point, a tiny dot, an enormous amount of light that none of us could understand, beyond human understanding, and therefore it's expanding. So what do we know today about the universe? It is expanding. From the Hubble telescope and measurements, the facts of the matter, whether you are a believer or not, is this universe began at a single point, and it is expanding at an enormous rate, actually. And the faster we get out in that expansion, the faster it expands. So we're seeing the confirmation of religious proposals confirmed by science, by scientists who have no necessary intention to confirm them. So I think it's actually a wonderful moment where science and faith are reinforcing each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always say both are pursuing truth.
Mhm.
And if we believe that there is one truth to be discovered, then these are two vehicles to point to truth.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They are mutually reinforcing revelations, excuse me.
That's right. How would you say, specifically around your medical practice? And there's a lot of talk now, probably there always has been, but I feel like it's highlighted right now as far as ethics, medical ethics. Now people can major in that in school. And I mean, it's a whole study. How do you see Christian faith playing out in the world as far as medical ethics go, but also in your own practice? How has that impacted how you've practiced?
I'm not sure I ever really have thought about the term ethics.
Mm.
In my cancer center, we have 25 oncologists and hundreds of employees, and there's a general broad feeling of acceptance of faith and different faiths. It's not that we necessarily, I'm a Methodist. I'm proud of
Mhm.
that because they kicked the Catholics out of England and somebody had to reform England. Uh, so, but when you walk into our cancer center, you get a distinct feeling that there's a spiritual element to it. Yes, we do have a prayer room and so forth, but the whole field of people facing potential the end of their lives and requiring sometimes difficult and challenging treatments is a place of faith. So I've never had an issue of ethics in that environment.
Mhm.
Perhaps I've overlooked it.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't think you overlook much. I don't.
And it seems like your whole ethos is based on your faith. So you haven't had, it sounds like, a conflict, maybe of ethics, because you've always led from your faith and your worldview and understanding of how God created people and the human dignity involved in every patient.
Yes.
Well, Dr. West, I would love to hear this book. You told us before we started recording that it's your one and only. It's your one and done. You're not going to write anymore. But what is your hope as people read your book?
Well, it is a one and done in the sense, it took 3 years.
Mhm.
It's not a simple project to write a book. And I think it addressed the most important issues we face as human beings. The title is Sacred Science. And I think if people understand that science, they get a picture of the reality of God, the power of the creation. And when you look back and you read the first sentence of the Bible, there was nothing, and God said, let there be light, and you realize that's exactly what science is telling us today. There was a nothing, and there was a tiny particle that exploded in light. I think if I were an atheist, I'd be hard pressed to deal with that. To me, is a mutually reinforcing revelation.
Mm.
And of course, I've written a book called Sacred Science, so I obviously believe that. But and I think 60%, it's said, of physicians are people of faith. It's not a minority.
Mhm.
And so the majority of people in my field or in the healthcare field in general, I think, are people of faith.
Would you say this book is written for them? I mean, I know it's written for a larger audience as well.
I think so. It was written for me, really. I wanted to express myself and what do I believe. And I think in a small way, each one of us does that in our lives. Perhaps not spending 3 years writing a book, but just contemplating in quiet time. How did I get here? Why am I here? What is the meaning of this life?
Mm.
That's our consciousness. That's the greatest gift God gave us, is creating us in His image to seek purpose, to seek spirituality, to seek a reason for living. And that to me is strong and compelling and evidence of the reality of God as there is.
Yeah. And I think about You took 3 years to write it. I just think about what had to go into that book as a scientist. I mean, it's hard enough just to write a book where you're not writing about science, but then to have all the details and all the learning and all the background that you need to make sure that, everything is correct. It's a burden that I could never bear, but you did. And I'm thinking just how beautiful it is to be able to put language to something that most of us don't understand. And I'm wondering how much that plays into people not recognizing divine design in science, is that they can't understand it. And
Yeah,
so then they just write it off.
that's right. And I've got a whole complete, I don't know, almost half a chapter on that issue. Don't write it off. It sounds like you can't understand it. And the metaphor I used was, you drive your car and you really get your car. You know it requires fuel, and that fuel really gets modified in a carburetor. And that energy of those pistons in your engine turn your wheels, and then you have a steering wheel. And I think you understand your car, then hopefully you can understand how this universe runs. They're actually not that different. We have an enormous energy supply, and we are traveling actually 1 million miles a day through space.
Mhm.
None of us ever think about that. Every time I pass a Chick-fil-A, I think everybody's looking for the next Chick-fil-A and not realizing we're on a million-mile journey today. That's kind
Mhm.
of like, we tend to not think in those larger thoughts, but we're taking this amazing journey through space every day.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think for a lot of people in midlife, you said those bigger questions come up, and we are looking at our own health, for example. And your mom died probably sooner than she wanted to,
Hmm.
and sooner than you wanted her to as a
For
young
sure.
adult. How do you explain, or maybe there's not an explanation, how do you talk with your patients as they are dealing with big questions of why is this happening to me now? There is this God allows things in the material world to happen that are painful to us. And if the material world is part of science and he is in control of everything, I mean, I think those are some of the big questions that some of our listeners may be struggling with right now,
Yeah.
is that God can heal in some areas, like addiction is a science that a lot of parents are struggling as their kids are struggling with areas of addiction, that why doesn't God intervene more? How
Yeah.
would you answer that question if a patient came to you with that big philosophical question?
Well, the old SOP is free will is important.
Mhm.
If God dictated everything that we did, we'd have no choice. We wouldn't know good from bad. We wouldn't know the significance of evil. And I'm sure you all, like me, have been frozen to the TV watching events in the Guadalupe River
Mhm.
and these children, and you wonder, how in the world can that happen? How do their parents deal with that? And my answer to that is always because God has a plan B. We're living plan A. We do. His mission to us is make the most of this life we can, try to live it with ethics, with meaning, with appreciation of him. He wants us to appreciate him, I believe. I think he put this earth in a special place. The two books written about earth are Privileged Planet and Rare Earth, because we're sitting in this beautiful spot so that we can see his creation. He wants us to see it. He wants us to actually praise him and understand the goodness he's done. And therefore, when these horrible things happen, I realize there's a plan B. Those children are not abandoned. I
Mhm.
feel so sorry for their parents. It just is so painful. But I know God has plan B, and I hope all of them have that faith and realize that that will be the case. And of course, my biggest dream in life is to see my mother again, and I still
Mhm.
believe I
Mm.
will.
Mhm.
Well, and it gets to the library. It kind of circles back in our conversation to there's a library that's in a different place that's higher than Earth. And I believe that's a part of a grander reality that we can't quite know yet. And yet it's very real and it's very there. And so that, in some ways that circles back to your library conversation.
It brings me back to the Higgs equation and where does it spend eternity? And that takes me to libraries in a higher dimension, which then take me to a library of genes and proteins, which then gives me an explanation for, quote, evolution. That's been such a problem for people, evolution. And yet, when we understand that it comes from a library in a higher dimension, probably almost here. I mean, when I think about mutations, let's just take in any creature's genome, being able to travel that library of gene and protein sequences and bring them back and build a team of genes that bring a new dimension to life. When you go back into, I don't mean to get too deep into biology and evolution, but the first creatures were fully formed. They lived on the bottom of the ocean, and a beautiful trilobite, little roly-poly. He could weigh about 10 pounds, but there was no partial trilobite. These creatures just, boom, they were there, fully formed. And we've spent, not me, but science has spent billions of dollars in Canada and China trying to look for precursors to these creatures. Surely there had to be preliminary fossils. No, they're not, and they haven't found any because they were fully formed by downloading from a higher dimension. So I think the journey of science trying to understand the earliest moments of life has actually confirmed that these creatures were fully formed. Trilobite was all there, not partial.
That's so fascinating. Oh, I could just talk to you forever. Well, Dr. West, as we wrap up today, what would be your final words about the intersection of science and faith?
They are mutually reinforcing revelations of God.
Mm.
We look at Scripture, we read it, we study it. I wish I studied it more. I actually am on a project right now of reading the Old Testament more than I have. We tend to be a Jesus person. We tend to focus so much on the New Testament. We're trying to go back and read more of the Old Testament. But that revelation is totally compatible with the revelation of God from science. And if you understand the 8 blueprints that built the universe, if you understand the incredible dimension of DNA, where did it come from? We don't know. We just sort of take it for granted. It's the most beautiful information storage device ever known to mankind. Where did it come from? So when you take those two, they're mutually reinforcing, and it hurts me actually that more people don't know more of the science because it is so reinforcing of the message of faith that each revelation and in their own way reinforcing each other about the reality of God.
That's beautiful. A lot of people fear that if they go down that science path, they'll lose their faith. But what I hear you saying is no, you're actually going to find it more and more and more as you go along.
I feel strongly that way. And so do the majority of scientists.
Mm-hmm.
It's the rare scientist that goes, okay, now we don't need God anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They appreciate these amazing things that came together to create this universe and then to create life and DNA. And it's the rare scientist who says, okay, now I know so much that I don't need God anymore. It's so much more common to say, my goodness, how did this all arrive and come together? Where did this DNA come from? Where did this universe come from? Where did this Earth, this rare and privileged planet? And I think most scientists are actually people of faith.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. West. And thank you for writing this book. You are a man who is in high demand in the medical field and has so much as a, also just with all that you're doing. And yet it's a gift to the world, this book that you've written. So thank you
Well,
so much.
the gift is from God in the contents of the book. I would love everybody to appreciate that gift and how fantastic and beautiful it is.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. West.
Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed this.